Hello and welcome to the international program. With two major sporting events, the Euro Cup and the Olympics, this has been an exciting year for our sports brands in Herzogenaurach. But one significant date was flying under the radar. Exactly 100 years ago, a small company was founded right here in our town, marking the beginning of an era.
With stars like Thomas Müller, Manuel Neuer, and Run DMC, 75th anniversary celebrations were in full swing at Adidas in June. And last September, Puma celebrated the same milestone with their top stars. 75 years. For many of us, these companies have been around all our lives and have given us so many personal memories that we treasure, whether they were our first shoes or shoes that brought out the best in our performance. And the history of these two major sports brands goes even beyond 75 years, all the way back to 1924, when a small firm, Gebrüder Dassler, was founded by the brothers Adolf and Rudolf Dassler. We met up with Christian Hoyer to learn more.
You've got a new exhibition at the museum celebrating 100 years of the Gebrüder Dassler company. But tell us a little bit first about the early years of Rudolf and Adolf Dassler.
Adolf and Rudolf Dassler were sportsmen when they were young and also later on, and they were in many clubs. They were involved in many different kinds of sports at the time. Football, of course, running, swimming, canoeing, boxing, javelin, and also shot put.
So how normal would that have been in those times here in Herzogenaurach to be able to do all those sports?
It was relatively normal. There was a general enthusiasm of sports, especially after the First World War, and many clubs, especially football clubs, were formed in Germany, also here in Herzogenaurach in 1916. And also the two brothers were competing locally and regionally. And then they recognized there are not the shoes they need, at least over here in Germany. And then they went into the business to produce sports shoes themselves.
So where did this training in shoemaking begin?
They knew about shoemaking here in Herzogenaurach at least since the 1880s, when industrialized shoemaking came into town. Their father was a foreman and the sister was working as a stepper in a shoe factory. Rudolf also became an apprentice, but Adolf became a baker first. He was an apprentice in a bakery in Bamberger Straße, just next to the parents' home. But then the First World War came, and all the three Dassler sons had to go to the war as soldiers, even Adolf, the youngest of them, because when he turned 18 the war wasn't over, unfortunately. But luckily that very year the war ended, and then the legend says he asked his parents, please, I have survived the war and I now want to do what I want to do, and I want to produce shoes. And the mother had a laundry business in Herzogenaurach. And then he started by himself in the laundry in the parents' home, and he also gained further knowledge of shoemaking through a professional shoemaker also in the neighborhood. But then the most important thing was when his brother joined. They founded a company on the 1st of July 1924. In the very beginning, it was exclusively a family business. The father was somehow involved, and their sister was involved, and another guy who was driving the milling machine, and the technical expert was Adolf, and the advertising and the commercial side to run the business, this was definitely Rudolf's part, and the two together were like a tandem, very successful at the time.
So it's surprising after the First World War that people could afford sports luxuries like sports shoes.
Yes, indeed, it was a very difficult economic situation in Germany at large, and in the shoe industry in Herzogenaurach in 1925, 80% of the former employees were unemployed. As a contrast to that, the Dassler Brothers company was running well because they specialized in sports shoes for every kind of sports you can think of. And due to the success, the workforce started to increase. And before the war started in 1939, it was almost 100 people in a very, very small business.
And how long was it before they moved from the home, the back room in the home, to their own facilities?
First of all, they tried to extend in the family home, but that didn't work any longer. But in 1927 they could rent another shoe factory on the other side of the Aurach near the train station, and in 1930 they bought that property and had another level built on top, and also a residential building for the parents and for Adolf and Rudolf's families. And in the very year before the war started, they bought another shoe factory here in Würzburger Straße. So before the war started, they were running 2 factories here in Herzogenaurach, producing sports shoes.
And then how broad was the customer base then? If Rudolf was a good salesman, were they exporting throughout Germany and beyond?
They were already exporting by the 1930s here in Europe, also to England, the home of sports shoes, and of course to Czechoslovakia, to Austria, to Switzerland, to Greece. But beforehand they had a very strong base here in Germany due to the many clubs, and the clubs had magazines, and the Dassler brothers were advertising in those magazines, and they had a kind of counselor, Joseph Weitzer. He is so important for the beginnings of the Dassler brothers. He was a sportsman himself, taking part in the 1912 Olympic Games, and Weitzer was working with the company Caspar Berg, based in Nuremberg, the biggest sports equipment producer, and they were looking for suppliers for shoes, and we don't know for certain, but this must be the connection. So he was engaged in 1925, and he was advising the Dasslers and told them how they can improve their shoes. And one of the most successful models at the time was the running shoe named after Weitzer. And of course he got some money for that. And Weitzer became the national coach of the German teams for the Amsterdam Olympic Games. He also made the connections for the Dassler brothers to the leading sportsmen of the time in Germany, and for the German teams for the Olympic Games. And then half of the Olympic team for the Amsterdam Olympic Games wore Herzogenaurach Dassler shoes, and Lina Radke, the first female Olympic gold medal winner. For 800 meters she won with Dassler shoes.
The Olympic Games in Amsterdam in 1928, just 4 years after Gebruder Dassler was founded, changed the fortunes of the company, and the 1936 Games on home turf in Berlin cemented that success. Before the Games started, Adolf Dassler met with and convinced many of the athletes to wear Dassler shoes. Although there is no definitive proof, it is thought that Jesse Owens, the star of the Berlin Olympics, wore Dassler shoes. Jesse stunned the world with a record-breaking performance, winning 4 goals in all his 4 events. In the years that followed, Gebruder Dassler built on their success with advertising that centered around Jesse Owens and other sports stars and the shoes that powered them to victory. But then the Second World War started and everything changed.
Yeah, the war unfortunately changed a lot. It is a decisive turning point in the history of the company, but also in the history of the relationship of the 2 brothers. In the beginning, of course, many workers disappeared to the German army, and the workforce was half what it was before the war started, and they were the only company in Germany allowed to produce sports shoes until October 1943, because the army still needed shoes. And then a new product came in, had nothing to do with shoes, nothing to do with Herzogenaurach. The Dasslers then were producing parts for a Fürth-based company which was producing anti-tank missiles until the end of the war.
So you mentioned that they lived together as a family. Things must have been pretty tough after the war then, when the relationships all broke down.
Yeah, the relationship even became wars already during the war because of diverging opinions between the 2 brothers, what to do during the war. They had different ideas of products, but then they went for Adolf's idea to supply the neighboring armaments factory in Fürth. So there was a clash there already. Then Adolf was allowed to stay in Herzogenaurach and wasn't enlisted to the army, whereas Rudolf had to go. And Rudolf only returned to Herzogenaurach after the war to be imprisoned by the Americans. Adolf was not. And of course Rudolf also was suspicious of his sister-in-law, Adi's wife, that she might have told the Americans anything. And the Americans here who came to Herzogenaurach, they saw in the advertising catalogues of 1939 that the Dassler brothers were advertising a picture of Jesse Owens during the Nazi period with an Afro-American athlete. So they cannot be that bad. And they allowed the Dassler brothers factory to restart already by November 45. Adolf was here in Herzogenaurach and he was running the company. Yeah, without Rudolf. No? And when Rudolf returned in 1947, the life between the two families was not easy. And they said, okay, it might be better to go different ways. The split actually took place in 1948.
And then there are many traditions in the town here about the rivalry across the river between the brothers.
Yeah, this is what happens later after they split. They somehow split the town into two. The adidas factory was on the southern side of the Aurach and the Puma factory was on the other side of the Aurach, and then allegedly there were pubs which were only frequented by adidas people and pubs that were only visited by Puma people. As regards Herzogenaurach, it is very good that we used to have such a successful sports shoe company in the 1920s and 1930s, because without that history, the common history of the two brothers, there would neither be Adidas nor Puma. And two prospering sports shoe companies which are still here in town nowadays is a really good thing, and we have to be proud of that.
And now you're open the doors of the museum, you're celebrating the beginning of these two marvellous companies. What can people expect to see inside the museum?
Inside the museum you can see 3 rooms. The first room is dedicated to the family history, linked to Herzogenaurach's town history for at least 350 years and more. And then the second room you can see the enthusiasm for sports after the First World War. And then of course the third room, the largest room, is dedicated to the Gebrüder Dassler sport shoes. There are so many special shoes. Both the companies opened their treasure boxes, and all the treasures from the 1920s and 30s are now here for the first time together. And it's really interesting. You have to come.
The exhibition at the museum continues until the 17th of November and provides a fascinating insight into the Dassler brothers and the small company that they built together. Adolf's innovative designs and use of materials, combined with Rudolf's marketing savvy and connections, meant that right from the beginning, the company was extremely successful. This success had a snowball effect over the last century, and even the split into Adidas and Puma and the bitter rivalry between the two companies that lasted for years could not stop their momentum. With cutting-edge products that enhance the performance of their athletes, as well as the use of recycled and recyclable material, both Puma and Adidas have kept alive the spirit of innovation that was at the heart of Gebrüder Dassler. And today we have these two giants in the sporting goods industry, looking ahead to the next 100 years.
Thank you for watching. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.